Now it is my pleasure to give us our main speaker of the morning, my good friend and neighbor, Pat Holmes. So I better find glasses here.
There's probably 40 pairs of reading glasses.
I think everyone wears the same reading glasses these days, right? Cheaters that you buy at Costco. Right? Pat Holmes is a graduate of Swarthmore College. He won awards there as the top senior athlete for business potential and was a two-time NCAA Division III All-American wrestler. Pat met and married Sylvia Crowley at Swarthmore. Sylvia is John and Barbara Crowley's daughter. They have 3 children, 3 daughters, all at Westridge School, and live in Linda Vista. Pat is my neighbor down the street. Since college, Pat has worked as a computer software programmer, a manager, and a consultant. He now specializes in Oracle Corporation products. Since 1998, Pat has been Vice President of Technology of a venture capital backed firm that hires doctors that work full-time in hospitals. The company IPC employs more than 800 healthcare providers in 14 states, billing over 1.8 million patient visits annually. Pat is active in the Tournament of Roses Association and AYSO, the soccer leagues. He's a longtime resident of Los Angeles, longtime president of the Los Angeles Oracle Users Group, serves on the Boston Court Theater Community Outreach Task Force, and serves on various committees at Westridge School. His interests include volunteering, cleaning the house, bocce, live theater, and enthusiasm. Pat?
Thank you, Bill. Couldn't have said it better myself. Should we have a picture in a moment? And if we could turn the lights down a bit, should that not work? There we go.
We can turn it down so we figure out how to do that. Doesn't somebody remember? Hold on.
Well, I think George went to do it.
How do we turn the light? There we go. He does it back here.
Okay. So, thank you. It's nice to see a full house today. Pretty impressive. In the tradition of the Pasadena Breakfast Forum, I'm having a title that's oblique and keep you guessing a bit as to what it's really going to be about, like Alan Menke's talk on COD or COD. This is titled George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, and Me. And if you looked at the display materials I had over on the desk there as you came in, or at this picture, maybe you realize now that George Washington, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt were all wrestlers of note. And did anyone already know that all 3 of those were noted for the wrestling ability? Nobody? No? Good. So really the topic today is the importance of wrestling. And I'm going to talk a bit about wrestling in general, and why I think it's an important sport. And then, as it is my maiden speech after being a member for 2 years, I'll talk about the importance of wrestling to me personally, the impact it had on my life, and some of the lessons learned, especially due to my father's contributions. Now, amateur wrestling, I'm talking about high school and college wrestling, what you see in the Olympics. I'm not talking about professional wrestling, the silly, asinine, really, entertainment that you'll see on TV. I think in the first half of the 20th century, professional wrestling had some legitimacy, but not for a very long time. It's not really a martial art. You've probably seen judo or jiu-jitsu or karate, and I like to think of it as wrestling has been domesticated in the same way a dog can be a pet versus a wolf or a coyote. For example, a chokehold is legal in judo, sambo, or jiu-jitsu, but not in wrestling. If you choke someone out in judo and they happen to pass out, you win. If you choke someone out in wrestling, you lose. So it's very different. It is very tough. One of the odd things that's happened is we have kind of a form of street fighting now on television called ultimate fighting or mixed martial arts. And when that started 10 or so years ago, the boxers and karate players showed up. But pretty much it's settled down to wrestlers and jiu-jitsu players, because most street fights end up on the ground, and wrestlers and jiu-jitsu players know what to do on the ground. It's 6 minutes straight action in high school, or 7 minutes in college. I've heard it said that an hour-long football game, which takes 2.5 hours to play, has about 6 minutes of action total. So it's a very draining sport on the mat and also off the mat, because as I'll talk about, there's weight classes and people tend to be also constantly dieting and losing weight and losing water weight in order to compete. Here's, I think this is a picture of Sammy Henson. I'll go back to this. You see the chewed up ear. At the international level, at the highest levels, all the wrestlers have messed up ears, a cauliflower ear. And that's because they don't wear headgear in the rest of the world. A little side note, I went to Iran in 1977 to wrestle. And we told them we were there for Koshti to wrestle, and they looked at our ears then and then just laughed, because they figured we must not be very good. Here's a guy sparring for position. Here's a guy, kind of a spectacular throw that you would see in freestyle. There's two very distinct, or three very distinct styles. What we do in high school and college is called scholastic or collegiate, or folk style, and the emphasis is on control, where what you see in the Olympics is either freestyle, which is an emphasis on throws and back exposure, but control is almost trivialized. And then there's also Greco-Roman, which is like freestyle, but it's only upper body from the hips up. So in freestyle, this might be worth 5 points. In collegiate, you might be penalized for attempting it, depending on how you brought the man down. It might not get any points if you didn't control him on the way down. Again, kind of a freestyle move where the back's being exposed. This is a national championship match earlier this year. Anyways, and another general point about wrestling is, and I like this about the sport, like boxing, there's a pin or a knockout. So you can be losing 10-0, 14-0, and if you pin the other guy, you win, and the points don't matter. So you win on either points or pin, which is, contrast that with going to a Rose Bowl and it's 47-3 in the third quarter, and everyone starts filing out, because you know that there's no way they can come back and win that game. A lot of history. That I've seen dates going back to 5000 BC. Here's a fragment from a temple in Iraq of wrestlers around 3000 BC. Some caves in Egypt, Beni Hassan caves. I've seen it dated 2400 BC and 3200 BC. Transcribed, it's like the world's first wrestling manual. It has a long series of different moves portrayed. Of course, it's one of the oldest sports, right after running away from saber-tooth tigers, I think. The Olympics started, I think, around 744 BC. We know that wrestling was added to the Olympics no later than 708 BC. Here's a bas-relief from Greece, 600 BC. A reproduction of some Etruscan wrestlers from 512 BC and a Roman statue from 230 AD. It also has some interesting culture. Everyone around the world probably wrestles or plays soccer. And this is a very odd style of wrestling that I just found out about when I was doing research for this talk, where they lather up in oil and wrestle in this one region in Turkey, starting from around 1340 AD, where a sheik had a couple of soldiers wrestle to the death. And ever since then, they've had a tournament in their honor, or something crazy like that. And I'm going to bypass all the obvious jokes about the oil. Japan, sumo's been popular since the mid-600s. Mongolia, I love this. It looks just like a wrestling match here, but except for the funny underwear and the referee's wearing a blue skirt instead of black and white stripes. Celebrity, we have some celebrities. President George Washington was a countywide collar and elbow champ, possibly colony-wide. Abe Lincoln was really famous for his wrestling, challenging all comers in a more of a free-form catch-as-catch-can champ. Teddy Roosevelt continued wrestling workouts the whole time he was governor of New York, and these are some other presidents that have wrestled. There's a picture of a famous story with Abe Lincoln wrestling a fellow named Jack Armstrong, an important part of the Lincoln lore. Other notable wrestlers, Robin Williams, Tom Cruise, author John Irving wrote The World According to Garb and the 158-Pound Marriage, Hotel New Hampshire, I believe. Now, how many recognize Ishur Danielovich Dembski, who's captain of the St. Lawrence University wrestling team in the 30s? Does anyone recognize that name? I'm sorry? Jack. There's not anybody named Jack. He starred in Spartacus, Lust for Life. It's Kirk Douglas. Michael Collins was the other astronaut. He was the one going around the moon while Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were goofing off down below. And Jeremy Gligg, one of the 4 men given credit for rushing the cockpit on the United 93, was a judo black belt and also a national caliber high school wrestler. So why is this an important sport? Why should schools like Bourbon Day have it, John? Because, first of all, it doesn't matter how big you are. You don't have to have a glandular condition in order to excel. I mean, you see somebody who's 7'6", and they can be a doofus and uncoordinated and make $400,000 or $500,000 a year in the NBA, like Mark Eaton did for 10 years. But in wrestling, you're wrestling against people your own size, more or less, because you're in weight classes. It's a very difficult sport in terms of draining. You know, I've probably played 12 or so sports, and it's the one that is the most draining and burns you out the fastest. But also, because of the weight classes is a plus and a negative for the sport, because most wrestlers, not all, will lose weight to be in a lower weight class so that they feel more competitive. It's part of the culture. And so, you know, one of my favorite stories from college was watching a basketball player come out of the locker room with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in each hand as he ate up on the way to dinner. And I left practice, and I still had a couple pounds of water weight to lose, and I went home and ran a couple miles and went to bed early. Wasn't studying, wasn't having a lot of pizza and beer in the frat from, you know, October through February. It's a meritocracy. You know, how many here have ever been benched by a baseball or football or basketball coach and you felt it was unfair or that you were better than the person who was playing ahead of you? It doesn't happen in wrestling. You know, if you're number 2 on the chart and you want to challenge the number 1 guy and you win, then you're now the number 1 guy. And that's, it may vary from coach to coach as whether 1 match decides or 2 out of 3 or something like that, but it's part of the culture. It's also simple rules. I mean, this is a picture of some gymnastics judges off to the side deciding the future of some gymnast, arguing, writing curious things on mysterious pieces of paper. So wrestling is much simpler rules, easier to follow. You don't need eye-hand coordination. I don't know how many sports don't require some eye-hand coordination. And I love this cartoon. The brain says catch the ball, but by the time the message gets to the hand, it's cat's too tall. Extremely poor eye-hand coordination. I mean, I'm 2,400 in one eye, and I got glasses when I was 10. I wasn't going to be having a long career in tennis or golf or baseball. I mean, wrestling is a sport for people like me. You can develop a style that suits you. If you're tall and skinny for your weight class, you develop leg riding or leverage moves. If you're short and stumpy, you develop low center of gravity moves or strength. You don't even need all your body parts, which is kind of a curious thing about wrestling. It's not uncommon to have a high school state champion who's blind. What's even more remarkable, and 3 of these people I didn't know about before 2 weeks ago. But, you know, there have been a number of wrestlers who are missing limbs who have actually done extremely well. This guy was outstanding as a high school senior in a tough state in New Jersey. 30 wins, 3 losses in his senior year. He wrestled Division I won a few matches. Now, not only could he compete and do very well, but he actually has advantages because he's missing his legs, which you would never say that a guy missing his legs is going to have any advantages playing basketball or football or tennis. But first of all, notice that because he doesn't have any legs and doesn't have the weight of the legs, his torso can be much larger. His torso is like the torso of a 165, 170 pounder going against a 125-pound opponent. He's very strong, and he was a Paralympics international powerlifting champion. Another advantage is, if you look in the top left corner, one of the first things they teach a wrestler on the top is to grab an ankle and a waist and drive. But you can't grab his ankle, he doesn't have one. You teach single and double legs to beginning wrestlers. Well, you can't shoot a single leg takedown on a guy who doesn't even have a single leg. Here's a guy with no arms and no legs. I discovered this. I was walking in Paseo and saw this book in a bookstore at Paseo and picked it up and read a little about it. And then I found 2 other guys because I was trying to remember what this guy's name was. He was 35 wins, 16 losses as senior, wrestling at the club level at the University of Georgia. Here's a guy with, it seems like even less arms and less leg. And he won more than he lost as a senior in high school, took 4th in some kind of AAU nationals tournament. And this guy was a Division III national champion, the thing that eluded me with missing legs from the just below the knee down. So why is it important to me? I love sports, but failing in sports. There was one year in Pop Warner where I seemed to have good sense and the coaches were excited about my playing, and then they found out I was 5 hours too old and 14 pounds underweight for the next division up. So and I didn't get to play that year. I think one of the more interesting things that I like to tell people about myself is that I played 10 years of hardball. I played from 8 through 17. And up through about age 15, they had to play you half the time. The last 2 years, I didn't play very much. In those 10 years, I had 4 hits. Now, people often think I'm joking, but I remember each one of them. The first one was a Texas leaguer to left center, and I remember standing at first base gloating and said, well, all that extra practice really paid off. And then it was another 2 years before I had it really hit. I had a ground ball through third, between third and short, a bat hop over the third baseman's head, and a bunt. So my father, seeing that he had 6 kids, but he saw that, to me especially, sports were important and I didn't have any chance of succeeding in any I tried yet, made a survey. You know, I had a friend who used to say that there are 3 kinds of people in the world: the people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who wonder what happened. And my father would make things happen. And he made this list of assets and liabilities, a balance sheet, for me, and showed it to people, and he ended up picking wrestling. He took me out to a local town that had a program for junior high kids. I did it 4 Saturdays in a row, and then got hooked. And I chose a high school that had wrestling, where I spent about 3 years on my back. I was absolutely the worst wrestler on the team. I was 5th, certainly of the kids who finished all the way through the year, 5th at 98 pounds at the lowest weight class. They let me wrestle 1 match. I found out later that the athletic director told me that the varsity coach that year said that I would never amount to anything. He didn't tell that to me. I found out about it later. JV 7 and 5 varsity. We had a weak high school team, and I finally made varsity as a junior. Lost my first 8 matches, but then finished 5 and 13. That summer, I went to 15 tournaments in 17 weekends. I lost to this one New York State star, 30-0. You can't even do that anymore, because they have a technical fall now if you get a 15-point lead. But I just kept shooting and shooting and shooting, and it was freestyle, and he just kept turning and exposing my back. And I was determined to get the moral victory of 1 point, which I did not do. I wrestled a collegiate kid from Kentucky, University of Kentucky, Kurt Mock, and there was this flurry where he put me in a cradle, and I recradled him, and I got a reversal and nearly got back points, and then he recovered and dispatched me fairly quickly. But when I came off the mat, my father said, you know, you really had him worried. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I thought he had killed you. Another lesson in humility. But that summer, I finally placed. I took second in the 13th tournament. I won the 14th tournament. And, you know, later people said, well, you worked really hard, but it was never work. It was just something I was doing for fun. I had a passion for it. I had found a passion. It took me a while to get good at it. But that summer and all those tournaments, another saying I've heard is, summer wrestling makes winter champions. I was 23 and 5 as a senior, took 3rd in Section 5. I got great press for losing 3 matches in the city Catholic finals. I lost to this one kid 3 times in a row who lost to the guy who was 5th in the state. And I was 3rd, so the other guy was 2nd, and then one of my other matches was against the guy who was 5th in the state. So I got great press. The guy who beat me said that he was so tired, and I never get tired. Holmes never gets tired. He must have an electric lung, which was in the local paper. And then right after the season was over, now this is like early March, I wrestled a couple more tournaments, and I wrestled a guy, Robin Parker, who had pinned everyone in his weight class that he had wrestled in the New York State Championships. And I led briefly, lost 4-8. And then I wrestled Kyle Grunwald again and lost 2-1. So at this point, I learned one valuable lesson, or had the seed of a lesson, and that is that I'm a something. You know, I think everyone needs to be good at something for self-esteem, and to identify. You know, I'm a tennis player, I'm a wrestler, career-wise, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor. You don't want to be just a vagrant. So it's mid-March of my senior year. Most people are waiting to see where they've been accepted. I had applied to 5 schools, gotten into all of them, but I wasn't really happy with any of my choices. The first choice, I hadn't even visited, and they didn't have any financial aid for us. And my father had gone through a bankruptcy at that point in his business. And the other 4 schools were safety schools I wasn't really interested in going to. My father said, well, maybe you can get a college scholarship, or at least some interest. And so we sent a flyer out. He made this flyer. It was so embarrassing, I wouldn't sign it. And he sent this 2-page flyer out to 100 schools that we had, that were just in the back of the NCAA wrestling guide. 20 schools responded. University of Kentucky coach came to my house and spent 2 hours talking about how pretty the girls were and how they wouldn't have any scholarship money for me at first. And he never once mentioned academics. So I ended up narrowing down. Now it's like late March, and I'm just starting over in my college search, and I ended up narrowing down to Swarthmore Cornell University in St. Lawrence. And there's a long and interesting, or at least I think interesting story that I don't have time for. But I ended up at Swarthmore, whereas, as you know now I enjoy being an All-American. Now, there's a couple stories I want to tell you about that I think are interesting. I'm not really watching my time, though. Will you give me a 5-minute warning? What do we got now? Okay. In the quarterfinals, I'm wrestling a guy named Jim Soares, who's the New England champ. He was from the University of Rhode Island. And the way the nationals work is if you make it to the semifinals, you're guaranteed to be an All-American. You can't finish any lower than 6th, even if you lose in the semifinals. And back then, top 6 was All-American. Now it's top 8. I'm wrestling this kid from Rhode Island, and I'm beating him 8-0, and he stops and takes some injury time. He had a twinge in his knee. And I look around, and it occurs to me, I'm going to be an All-American. Now, I had never set that as a goal. It was unthinkable, considering my high school career. And I look over, and my father is sitting in the corner, probably the only time he was ever in the corner for one of my matches. But it was a case where we only sent one coach to the Nationals, and there was an empty chair, and my father sat there, and he was speechless. He was all choked up, and I got a little choked up. And unfortunately, the match had to continue. And at that point, my concentration was broken, and you can see it was 8-8 the rest of the way. I finished 16-8, but pretty much just kind of coasted through that match. Beat a guy named Barry Barone, who was a 3-time All-American, New York State champ in the semis. That was an interesting match that I don't really have time for. And then in the finals, it was broadcast on ESPN. Now, is there anyone else here who's had their butt kicked on national television? One. I got one hand. I have to hear more about that. Unfortunately, I had a friend who was a sports writer who was following my progress over the AP wire, and so he invited a bunch of friends over to his house to watch me get thrashed on national television. It was actually the closest match this kid had. It was what really annoyed me. It was a guy I had beaten the year before, but he was totally on, and he had improved, and he just took me down at will, and it was not a smart match. Luckily, I think the tapes have been destroyed. As a junior, lost to a guy who ended up being in the '88 Olympics in Greco-Roman. We had some good wrestlers in Division III. This is some pictures of matches from the semifinals against Barry Barone of St. Lawrence University, Kirk Douglas's alma mater. You know, I got to be a big man on campus. Now, trace this. I was terrible at sports. My father finds a sport for me. He helps me start over with a college search, and I end up in a place where I had a wonderful college experience. You know, I got to be on the cover of the Winter Sports Media Guide, nice write-ups, and the eminent Scholar Athlete Award as a senior. Here's a comic strip that someone wrote about me in the college paper about a kid that say, well, I'm about to wrestle this Hondo Holmes from Swarthmore. I'll show him a thing or two. And of course, what I teach him will have absolutely nothing to do with wrestling. As he gets tossed off the mat, tied up like a pretzel. A lot of heroes and memorable characters. One I hope to have time for at the end. Full college experience, president of the frat, met my wife Sylvia, John's daughter, show bus coordinator, college comedy show on the college radio station, about 5 or 6 other things. And my career in computers, I needed a science credit my senior year, and I took a programming class. And then the most significant benefit, that's from left to right, Miranda, Felicity, and Bridget Holmes, and Sylvia and me in front of our house up the street from Bill. I haven't gotten my warning, so I'll tell this story. Another making things happen story for me that Bobby did was, there was this opportunity to go to Iran in 1977. Now, this was a year before the Shah was deposed, and a year before the revolution, and it was $750. We had to kick in $750. It was 3 weeks at West Point for training and then 2 weeks in Iran. And obviously it was heavily subsidized, but we still had to come up with $750 each on our own. And I remember in particular the situation that Mark Bassini, Mark Marone, and I were in. Mark's father was the city attorney. He was well off. His reaction was, I'm the one who needs a vacation. Why should I pay for Mark to go on vacation? And he said, no. which I thought was incredibly short-sighted. It was a trip of a lifetime. Mike Marone grew up fairly poor. I won't go into any details, but his father said, well, we don't have the money, and that was the end of it. My father, who had gone through this bankruptcy, mortgaged the house for his business and then gone bankrupt. And we didn't really have any money. And he said, well, we don't have the money, but you have to go. So let's figure out a way for you to go. And what we ended up doing was sending a letter to about 24 friends, asking for a loan of $75 each. Got about 12 back, which gave me a little spending money. I think one person gave it to me outright. A whole bunch of people gave it to me as I started to pay it back. One was explicit about paying it forward, that if I'm in a situation where people are going on a cultural exchange trip, that I remember that and contribute for that. And I've had many opportunities like that, and that's had the intended effect. And it was an incredible trip of a lifetime. Here I am in my USA singlet and warm-up. A picture I took as we drove through the Elburz Mountains from Tehran up to the Caspian Sea. I forgot to turn on the little pointer thing, but there's a town called Gorgan about 30 miles from what was then the Russian border, where we wrestled against an Army national team with incredible cheering. And then we couldn't understand where it was coming from until they turned on the lights at the end, and we saw there were about 7,000 soldiers there watching the match. Persian rug weaver, who I understand burn out pretty much by the time they become 18 and become blind and homeless. Often, not always. And we were, of course, American kids, totally amused by the Middle Eastern toilets. And I love the Wriglers gum. Not Wrigley's, I guess they don't have Y in Farsi. Lessons learned, make things happen. That's certainly a big lesson that I learned from this. Showing up is 90% of success. Losing can be great for you. One of the other things I got a lot of press for was losing a close match to a guy who was a 4-time Division I finalist and a 2-time Division I champion, Darrell Burley from Lehigh. I only won one tournament in high school and only one in college, but it's interesting what losing did for me. And I also wrote this quote, which is not uncommon. A lot of people have said similar things that ended up being sent out by the head of school to the senior class. Victory is not success, but only progress, and losing is not failure, but only experience. It's like, as long as I didn't give up, as long as I kept showing up for tournaments, the success would eventually happen. We just didn't know how long it would take. It's important to make a difference. Find a passion, develop a skill, IMO, whatever. Everyone wants to be appreciated. I've been thinking about this a lot with my employees, trying to make, and my family too. I'm going to make sure that I appreciate my employees and show them that they're appreciated. And the same thing with my kids and my wife and my neighbors. Heroes. I think a lot about heroes. I was planning actually originally to do a talk about heroes. I read a talk an art essay by Brand Blanchard, who was a prominent 20th century philosopher who taught at Swarthmore. He actually taught John Crowley at Swarthmore. And he talked about how important it was to be reasonable, but I was like, great, but how do I get there? And he actually offered the solution. He said, find someone who has those qualities that you admire and try to emulate those people. And I read this just as I was getting out of college, and I think about it a lot. You've probably seen the WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? And I think, well, what would Bobby do? Or what would Brad do? Friend Brad, who's a remarkable person with a lot of integrity. Certainly when I'm in a situation where it's a test of integrity or dignity, I think, well, what would John Crowley do? What next? I want to get in shape. I coached wrestling in South Pass for 10 years, and the guy I coached with, I told him one day that I wanted to get in shape. He said, well, round's a shape. So I want to be specific about getting in good shape. Making a comeback. I'd like to start or sustain one or more programs and make a difference. I wanted to show you this picture because this is one of the guys I wrestle with often. It's Alan Zorthian, Gerard Zorthian's son. And I wanted to show him this because I want to be able to tell him that I showed a picture of me pinning him to 45 people. And I have this little cartoon. I love this. This is a couple of older folks in like a retirement home. One tips the other chair over with a cane and says, leverage, Withers. I haven't thought of leverage for years. Becoming more and more apt. If I have another minute? All right. Anyone recognize this guy?
Hello.
Who?
Autogram.
Well done. Autogram. Another picture. Wearing, you notice he's not even wearing cleats. He played 10 years in the All-American Football Conference, NFL, played in all 10 championship games, in those 10 years, winning 7. Also was on the bench for a basketball championship with the Rochester Royals. He was athletic director of the U.S. Coast Guard, and I included him because he's the guy who handed me my first All-American plaque, or the National Place winner. And it occurred to me, I was a couple years older and had been a student of sports, and I thought I was probably the only kid, the only person in my generation who knew or understood or appreciated who he was. And when I met with him, I said, it's a great honor to meet you, sir. And he very graciously said, it's an honor to meet you too, which I didn't really believe, but it was very gracious of him to say. And I guess that's it. I will entertain any questions. We can turn the lights back on, maybe. I do have some links if you're interested in seeing, these kids. Russ, I'll email anyone who's interested in some more information. Yes, Nick.
I want to comment on Vince McMahon.
The question was, do I want to comment on Vince McMahon? I'm a capitalist. More power to him. I just don't want people confusing that with real wrestling. Vince McMahon is the person really responsible for taking professional wrestling to the next level and making it palatable, a good entertainment or fun entertainment for middle and upper class. I mean, in the 70s, it was such a lower class sport. There was a joke told in professional wrestling circles about what has an IQ of 50 and 10 teeth. The answer was the first 10 rows of a professional wrestling audience. Vince McMahon took it way, way beyond that. I mean, more power to him. And there have been some wrestlers, real wrestlers, who have gone on and made a pile of money in professional wrestling. In the same way that we had wrestlers going into Ultimate Fighting. Kevin Jackson won $75,000 about 10 years ago in an Ultimate Fighting Championship tournament. And that's like 4 years of training for the Olympics, because his alternative is being an assistant coach for $19,000 a year or something at Iowa or Oklahoma. So, there's another guy who's a two-time national champ who's now going into Ultimate Fighting. I just read about him in one of those magazines over there. Yes? Thank you. Oh, John.
I just want to say, I didn't realize what my brother was doing, but he was on the Naval Academy wrestling team, and he was really liked wrestling, and I can see now what he was up to. But
Right.
I always thought it was kind of dumb.
We have to get over the I'm wrestling, getting sweaty and rolling around with other men problem. It's not hard to get past that after when you get your face pushed in the net and you realize you want to give back. It's better to give than to receive.
Why isn't Greco-Roman popular?
Why isn't Greco-Roman popular? I think it's just kind of awkward looking, and it doesn't appeal to me at all as someone who's tall and skinny. It tends to be stumpy guys with large muscles, and because you can't. I think of collegiate as something where you can do lots of moves that you can't do in freestyle because you expose your back, and that's the worst thing you can do. And in Greco, you also eliminate a lot of leg moves, and so it's more stilted. It's a much more limited repertoire of moves because it's only upper body.
Where did Hondo come from?
Helen, yes.
Where did Hondo?
Oh, it's boring. I should make up a story. I just had a pair of pants when I was a freshman in high school. They were a Hondo brand, and people called me that. I know I should make up a story, but I've never been good at lying. Thank you.
Do we have any more business? Jim, I forgot the committee. Do we have a report from the committee?